Welcome to the show, everybody. We're excited to have Will Kloefkorn on. He is the VP of Sales at the EcSell Institute. And we're really intrigued to have this conversation because he's on the sales side of the industry, as well as he teaches a lot of things that I think we can take a lot away from in their model. And so it's a great conversation, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Getting Past the Premium podcast, where we focus on breaking down risk management problems bit by bit until we find a solution. If you would like to discuss anything you hear on GPP with us, please reach out using the links in the description. Enjoy today's episode.
All right, well, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming in.
It's good to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to have you in.
I think I'm excited to kind of dig in here because, like, the show before the show, we always call it when we talk for 15 minutes before we actually start the recording, was good, right? We had a whole podcast in and of itself.
We missed out on 15 minutes of content.
Hopefully Alex had it recording, but no, I think because we talked about there's a couple different routes to take this conversation, which I think is super intriguing. So, but let's start with just kind of who you are, who the EcSell Institute is, and kind of what you guys do for clients.
Sure. So I'm the VP of Sales at the EcSell Institute. I've been maybe a little bit rare in the sense that even when I was this tall, I knew I was going to get into sales in some capacity. And so at EcSell companies, we work in three different verticals: business, athletics, and education. Across all three of those, our premise is very simple. It's, hey, if you're responsible for leading a team as a manager or coaching a team as a coach or teaching students, there are certain things that you can do and do them well to drive performance. And it's really unique to the individual and the culture that exists. And what we found, the reason we went into business 14 years ago is that if you're a high-performing employee or athlete, lots of times you know the X's and O's or you know the industry. But when you get promoted into that leadership role or that manager role, it's like, well, here's your team, here's your expectation, go get it. And no one really teaches the activities or the behaviors or the nuances of how do I drive human performance. And so that's what we're all about. And I'm, all day, every day, I'm looking for senior leaders, athletic directors, folks that buy into that sentiment to say, hey, potentially we can help you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think we've got the book, that Bill and Sarah wrote. If you're watching the video, The Coaching Effect, on the table. And I think a lot of the stuff, as I mentioned, that you guys teach is very applicable. But I kind of want to start with your angle on the sales side of things, because you're selling something that people don't have to buy, right? As opposed to the risk management industry. But as we were talking about before, we started recording, the same principles apply at the end of the day, right? So I think maybe let's start though. Where do you typically go, and how do you find your prospects? Like, how do you get in the door? How are you getting those opportunities?
Right. Well, it's evolved over the years, right? I mean, when we first started, it was like we have a non-functioning website and a list of 30 names, and it's just you're dialing them to see if you can drum up. It's just knocking on every door, right? Mm-hmm. Now, as we've evolved and we've become more sophisticated, we do things like this. We're having podcasts, or you have a book, or you're advertising on Twitter or e-marketing or what have you, right? So, I think what's important about any of that is how it comes in the door, because if you're a outbound salesperson and you're just walking agency to agency or door to door, it's tough sledding, and you better be really thick-skinned and persistent, as opposed to somebody who found you via referral or on Google, who in their buyer's journey is, hey, I have a need and I heard you could help me. That's a totally different conversation, right? And so even today, we're not so established where you're doing all inbound. And so it's a little bit of a mix where, when people find us, great, success rates are really high. But at the same time, part of the silver lining of having to knock on the doors and build it that way is that there is an extra market share or level of success that you can get it if you're willing to go that route as well.
Yeah. Work. Yeah, it's interesting. We love having these conversations because they're the dual threat conversation. You can have the conversation we're passionate about, like growing our team and leadership and trying to figure out, like you said, where the X's and O's are and how to make them work most efficiently. But then also, you're in an industry where you're selling advice and only advice. And we've gone on a journey over the last several years at Ellerbrock, but with this podcast in particular, over the last few episodes, really trying to help other people in this industry that's very product and transactional in nature become more advisory in nature. So I guess kind of on the heels of where you're going out and finding people to work with, kind of walk us through like what a typical relationship looks like for you.
Yeah. So I'm all front end sales, right? So relationship could look like in any shape or form. Initially, what the relationship begins is I don't know you, you don't know me, right? And so
you get in somehow, either
somehow, some way,
cold call or referral or whatever,
right? And so obviously, how you meet somebody is going to be different. If Elliot introduces me to a buddy of his, and we have a conversation, there's pre-existing trust. There may be some need that he's already outlined, and so that conversation is going to go a little bit different than if I just meet somebody who I happen to cold call into. So the relationship always takes the shape of we don't know each other, and that to me is whether you're selling something intangible or something tangible as like a commodity. It all begins with relationships, with a question. It's like, I'm just going to ask you about yourself. What is it? Because to me, fundamentally, there's no real difference between when I was like 8 years old, for example, and I'd go selling Babe Ruth candy bars for Babe Ruth. It's like when you get to the door, it's not, hey, I have candy bars. Do you want to buy some? It's, hey, do you have kids? Do you like candy? Halloween is only 2 weeks away. You know what I mean? Could you use some candy? Just ask some questions to facilitate that person talking about themselves or what they need, and then allow that to ask even more questions. And eventually they may come back and ask you questions, but if they don't, you could have a 30-minute conversation with somebody and really say 2 minutes worth of stuff about yourself. That to me is how you build the relationship right from the start, just because that's what they care about, them.
Yeah, it's awesome. There's a lot to unpack there. So, yeah, so walk us through kind of a real life example today on, how that conversation goes down, and give us an idea on like your guys' sales cycle and what you're trying to walk a prospect through.
Yeah. Okay, so take two different examples, right? Both that come, so we use an outbound lead gen team, right, that calls on our behalf and sets meetings.
Okay.
They call into somebody, and Elliot answers the phone and say, hey, Elliot, you got 45 seconds to visit? They say, well, shoot, yeah, I got 30, Will, go ahead. It's like, listen, here's the reason I'm calling is just to set a conversation with you. But what I want to talk about is your leadership team and some best practices and proven strategies out there that can help your revenue grow, but by focusing on managers. Is that something you want to do? You could ask a couple of questions within that. They say, sure, fine. So then you set up that conversation. This comes back to what we were talking about. Through a line of questioning, you get to know, why'd you take the call? And for some people, it's, well, we have X, Y, and Z coming down from our CEO. We know we've been thinking about leadership development for a while. And so when you called, it was timely. And then from there, that path is generally pretty linear, where it's, hey, I have a need. I have a power that allows me to make a decision. And it's usually a conversation, asking them a bunch of questions. Then it's more of a presentation, the next call, and then it's either a debrief or a decision, right? So a 3-step process. Okay. As opposed to, you could have that same conversation, but somebody gets on the call and they're just like, I don't know, it sounded interesting. And from there, the line of questioning is a little bit different, and you're going from somebody who's completely aware without a need, and the goal of that call is to slowly over time get them to need.
Understand that they have one.
Yeah, because it's, as silly as this analogy is, it's like planting a seed of corn. With that person, you're planting the seed, and you're going to have to come back and water it. And if you come back in 2 weeks and start stomping on the ground and be like, well, where's the corn? You're never going to get it. So it's just different intentions based on meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and I think everybody listening can probably equate that to the risk management side. I mean, we deal with both ends of the spectrum. It's funny, sales is universal at the end of the day. But I think it's important. It's different when we're selling from that advisory perspective, because it naturally, in order to do it well, it naturally comes from good question asking and understanding the client deeply, because that's how you figure out where the needs are, where the problems are. I think in our industry, we tend to stay pretty surface level because everybody has to buy insurance and other risk management products. And so it's easy just to go in and say, hey, let's get it for 15% cheaper or whatever, let us quote it, and we'll come back with a better option. When in reality, I think the industry is slowly moving towards that deeper understanding where we can solve problems either inside the insurance product or solve problems outside. A lot of firms are talking about things outside of insurance. And so that's where I just think it's such a good conversation around somebody that is talking through with a client that you might have to bring up a need that they weren't even aware that they had, right? A problem that they weren't aware they ever had. So I'm curious on just that piece, if you've got any more tips for everybody listening, like dive into that a little bit more of because I'm going to equate this again, the risk management industry. Sometimes we have to bring up a problem that the client doesn't know they had within, say, an insurance product or within maybe around an insurance product. And I think that's a very different process than what a lot of our industry is used to.
Sure. So when that happens, as a rule, how long does it take people to make decisions like that? Where it's like, okay, I'm going to introduce this new product that they may or may not know exists, or this new need. Do they move quickly on that? Does it depend on? Okay, well, because to me, the answer that's universal there, whether it's risk management or what we're doing, it's asking somebody to make a quantum leap usually doesn't occur. Like, there has to be a deep wound, and I need a tourniquet now to make a decision, right? And so if their emotional readiness is 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 to make a purchase, then the goal isn't to go from 3 to sale. The goal is to go from 3 to 4, and then over time to go from 4 to 6. And that may take 3 months. It may take 3 years, right? I always joke because, my wife and I, it took me, I have a friend that works for a bank in Lincoln, right? He tried to get me to switch after I graduated college to the bank that he was working at. One of my best friends. I was at Wells Fargo. I could have done it. I didn't really like my relationship with Wells Fargo, but it was fine. I just didn't really have an immediate need, right? But he kept touch pointing me. He kept, with social events, he'd nudge. He put value in front of me the way he would as if I wasn't his friend. And then wouldn't you know it, a couple of years later, Wells Fargo made a mistake. I wasn't happy. All right, it's time. I'm in. Now, what was it? It was a catalytic a moment that Wells Fargo led me to that. So he did his job. That sale wasn't made that day. That sale was made, along the linear timeline. So likewise, me and my wife bought our house in probably 2 weeks. So, one's very trivial decision, and the other is life-changing decision. But it all depends on where you're meeting that client at in terms of their emotional readiness to buy or to even entertain something new. Because you guys know that's tricky. If you are introducing a product to somebody that they are a challenge that they don't know exists, well, you got to be prepared that they might not even like that. Yeah. Because most people don't like to be uncomfortable, as is noted in the book many times. But good advisors do that, Yeah.
Well, they might not know they don't need it, and it's going to take you a while to do that. And we battle this really old, just transactional based philosophy in our industry constantly, where if you're an advisor and you're operating from a true advisory perspective and you're going to go in and completely change the way a company looks at their healthcare, for example, they're battling this old transactional model in their head nonstop. This time of the year, it's like, hey, well, oh, wow, this is a really big conversation. It's more than what we're prepared to go through in the next 2 months. We're just going to go ahead and take the 20% renewal in the shorts this year, and then let's start this conversation in January because it's so big, and that's fine, but you better be building that relationship and taking steps to build that relationship and groom it, like you mentioned, over the course of a long time. You call that person today in October, they might be at a 3.
Yeah.
Maybe you get them to a 4 by the end of the year, understanding that you're probably not going to get it closed. But then how do you get them from 4 to 10 in 2022? You know?
Yeah. So as cliche as it is, it's beginning with the end in mind and then working that process along the way. And so this is where I think lots of times salespeople fall into the trap and managers fall into a trap. It's like, well, tell me my activity, or what do I need to do to get to the sale? And it's like, well, your intention then, in the example that you just gave, is those first conversation is purely understanding and asking questions and gathering intelligence, right? Because I know that for a success in the first call is for them to listen to what I have to say, for me to ask questions, surely to listen to what they have to say, and then get a commitment to a next step, whatever that step may be, right? And then from there, you start to do whatever it is that you do in between conversations. That can be, hey, I asked a question early on. They have 3 kids, and one of them is really into swimming. Okay, well, in my CRM or in my notes, I'm going to write a month from now, find an article on swimming and send that to that person.
Yeah.
Because it lets them know that you were paying attention. But even though it's intentional and it's contrived, it's still 99.9% more than most transactional salespeople are going to do, right? Yeah. And so if you do that, you can't help but feel, oh, well, that was nice. That was interesting. So when you come to the next call, you've done something that's moved along that emotional readiness scale. And that can be something that's industry related. It can be something not industry related. And then you're coming back and you're probably playing a slow game there, asking more questions. And eventually you get to a spot where mid-year next year it comes around and it's like, listen, we've been talking now 6 or 7 times. And along the way, I've heard you say A, B, C, D, and E. In order for you to get to where you said you wanted to go fall of last year, is it going to take A and B? Yeah. Well, why do you want to have this conversation a year from now? No, I want to do it, right? But you can't ask that question on call number 2. You got to allow it to go to call number 7.
Yeah.
So it's patience. It's hard in a world where immediate gratification is everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, gosh, there were a couple of good things in there. Do you know the group Admired Leadership with Dr. Randall Stutman?
No.
He has only one app on his phone, and it's the reminder app. That's it, which is amazing. I'd love to know how to get to that point.
Yeah.
I was at a conference with him and another guy, and we challenged each other to delete 10 apps off of our phone, and that was difficult.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's got one, and the only one is a reminder app, and he does exactly what you said. He'll just listen for people and what's good to people and what's going on in their lives over a period of time, and we'll set reminders. And Will has his kid's got a baseball game coming up in 2 weeks. Ask Will how the baseball game went.
Right.
And it goes into his phone, and that's how one of his tricks to propel relationships. Right. It's super useful.
It's a good one.
That is a good one. I'm just impressed that he's only got the reminders app on his phone.
It's insane. But fantastic. Yeah, it is. It's taken these people from, like you said, 0 on the emotional readiness score and moving them down, but understanding where they're at.
Yeah. I'm personally, and I think you could argue against this, but I'm personally not a big believer in assertion, right? I'm not just going to show up and enforce my will on you over time, and that's what's going to make you to get a decision. I think that's where you get buyer's remorse. I don't think that there's good relationships. My job is to get there and figure out what it is that you are desirous of. And if we can potentially help, great. I'll show you a path to that. And if we can't, and that's fine, then maybe I'll show you another path.
Yeah.
Right? And to me, I'm not going to do anything but that, because that's where sales gets, oftentimes I think when you talk about sales as a profession, it's like car salesperson.
Yeah, it gets the bad name.
Yeah, it's transactional, it's pushy. No, it's not if it's done well.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to allow people to realize what they want And if we're the right people, or if I'm the right person to work with, awesome. If not, there's an abundance of opportunities.
Yeah, we all can point to transactions in our lives, or like sales transactions, where they feel great, and we know that we're being advised properly, and we know the ones that aren't.
100%. You can also feel you can feel when you walk into a restaurant, if somebody has been trained to ask for an upsell. Would you like a dessert?
Yeah.
Right. And that's good. If they get them to do it, that's good. But you can also feel somebody who is engaged and wants to be there and is asking that question with authenticity.
Yeah.
Or if somebody's asking because they don't want to answer to the manager when they watch it on film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So attitude is a huge part too in relationship. It's like, do I want to be there? That's palpable. Can't fake it.
Yeah. I was just listening to a podcast on that note where he said, anytime you have call reluctance or you don't want to ask the question or whatever, he said, just remember why you're doing what you're doing and ask, should I do this? And he goes, inevitably the answer is always yes. Like, yes, you should make that call or whatever. And he goes, you take that quick step back and it's going to make you that much more likely to be like, yep, I should. All right, pick up the phone or stop in the door or, ask the person the hard question or whatever.
Right. Well, I like that approach, because then what you're doing there is you're circumventing emotion.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, I don't think anybody, we just hired some new outbound salespeople. And helping them and teaching them and talking with them, it conjures up the emotions early on of what that felt like. It's not, even today, it's not a fun feeling to pick up a phone and call somebody cold.
Mm-hmm.
It's unnatural. It doesn't feel great. But if you can switch the lens with which you're viewing that, whether it's externally or internally focused, well, that emotion is going to drive the behavior. Yeah. And so you have to recalibrate. You have to find the alignment in what it is you're looking to do.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's what companies, for example, get wrong about employee engagement. It's like employee engagement hasn't hovered or switched too much from 30% over the last 40 years because they keep relying on the external thing, the business. Get them engaged in the business. No. Get your employees engaged in themselves and help them draw the line of sight into what it is they want to accomplish, and then backtrack that to the company.
Yeah. How does the company help facilitate their personal goals?
Yeah.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
We were just having this conversation.
Right. Well, companies, especially companies that are flat, and you talk about something like career development or professional development. Lots of times people think about that in terms of, well, what's my next rung up the ladder?
Yeah.
And if you're flat, that's tough as an organization. So what do? We ask questions to that person about what they really care about.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they don't want to be a manager. What they want is people to listen to other things they can do, philanthropic things, just growth efforts, going to a training event, or doing something for their kids. There's all sorts of things you can do.
For sure.
It always comes back to just caring and asking questions.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we talk about this all the time. So let me ask you a question on the heels of that then. This is completely switching gears, but going off of, let's say that you start to implement. I'm going to summarize that as having like a more customized plan or individualized plan for, let's say, attraction and retention of talent.
Sure.
Okay. Where we're going to go around the organization, we're going to have one-on-ones around, what are you personally involved in, and how can we, help you, and what learn about them, right? What do different things mean to you in life, and what are you and your husband or wife trying to accomplish financially, and all the things that really deeply understand what they're doing. Mm-hmm. How do you take that stuff and come back to the drawing board then and make widespread decision, like company level decisions about how to, or do you just continue to individualize it across the board and everyone knows that it's customized to each individual person?
Well, it's a good question. I'm going to throw a question back to you guys before I answer that, which is have you seen a shift from being able to do things maybe more cookie cutter and making that shift now to things need to be more tailored towards our individual clients, our individual employees? Like, have you seen that in the last 10, 15 years?
It's 100%. And it's happening at a more rapid pace today.
Yeah, I'd say in the last almost 3 years, it seems like, or 4 years.
Around personalization, customization than we ever have.
Yeah.
I just read an article with Charles Schwab they're basically saying that like a mutual fund or an index fund is no longer good enough for the individual investor. That it's all going to be personalized relatively quickly for each individual investor. So like everyone's feeling it right now.
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's why I asked the question. It's like I always use the term radical individualization, and it's not going away. And if you think about it, we all experience it now in our lives, but think back, Elliot, how old are you?
33?
33, okay. 30.
Took me a second.
So I'm 39, right? And so in the mid-1990s, if you're out playing a sport and you want a sports drink, what are you buying? Well, there's really one brand, it's Gatorade, and there's 3 flavors. And now, if that same situation exists, there's so many flavors of Gatorade that I can't even find the original 3.
Mm-hmm.
Or me growing up, if I wanted to watch,
which is all I really want.
Which is all I really want. I just want a damn fruit. I just want a damn fruit punch.
I just want lemon lime. That's it.
The purple's the best.
Yeah, growing up, I watched it was the Cubs on WGN or it was the Braves on TBS.
Yeah,
those were the options. Right now, I can watch literally anything in a push of a button through one of the 27 apps that I have on my phone, right? Mm-hmm. And so individualization is not going away. That's an expectation. And so coming back then to your question, leaning on what I know, which is coaching and leadership, everything can have a framework, and then that framework can lend itself to that individualization. So if you read the book, for example, through a decade of research, what we found is that there's 4 activities that a manager needs to do with their employees if they really want to drive performance, right? It's one-to-one meetings bi-weekly, team meetings once a month, career development plans every 90 days, and then observation or performance feedback, which is you have a job to do, I'm going to observe it, and then we're going to go over how I can help you. Mm-hmm. Those 4 activities in and of themselves don't blow anybody away. And you don't want to micromanage so much that you tell somebody this is how you have to do it. But you do want to teach people, hey, here's how you do these activities, and here's how you do them well, and here's how you refine your quality as a coach or a manager. Because how I do a one-to-one meeting with my salesperson who's been in the role for 6 months versus somebody who's been there for 16 years, they both need one-to-one meetings. They just need them to be ran and executed differently. And what they care about is different. And that's true across the board. And so the framework, the process needs to be one that has been proven to work, but how you operate within that then is going to be unique to the individual manager style and certainly unique to what each employee is trying to accomplish. And you better have a good stomach to be a manager or a leader because that's hard.
Yeah.
But it's also what works.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, it's like, take flexible hours, for example. It's hard to have one employee and, it's like, well, this is what they really care about. And this is how we're going to do it. Yeah. If we care about this employee and they perform for us and they add a lot of value when, other people don't care about that or whatever. But I think a lot of companies are reluctant to make changes at the same time because they're scared about the back-end regulation of the individualized customization, if that makes sense. Or do you agree with that?
No, I do. I think that you're absolutely right. I think it speaks then to the value of strong vision and strong leadership. So for example, I was talking to a CEO of an engineering firm, a rather large engineering firm, and I'm just fascinated by where the dust is going to settle post-COVID in terms of remote work and all of the stuff that has, been drummed up over the last 18 months. And he said, we are going to be an on-site establishment. That's how we're going to operate. Now, we're going to give 30 days of remote work. 30 days, and then you have your PTO and you have your other stuff that goes into it. And if you're the type of person who says, I'm working remotely, I'm not going to be a fit for that culture, that's okay. It's just, he goes, I don't want to be insensitive, but it's somewhat collateral damage because our ship's going this way. And in order for us to be in lockstep, you have to buy into where we're going.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean, which I think a lot of organizations are falling into a trap right now because they haven't been able to deal well with COVID in some ways, which is, the inmate can't run the asylum. The hierarchy exists for a reason. And if you're going to make your decision, then you need to align with the people that you're making it and go forth. You can't be all things to all people. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think it becomes a little bit tricky with individualization. It's like you got to have a line in the sand and a framework, but yet, not go too far. Mm-hmm. That's an art. There's no, this is how it's done and this is how it's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny as I was listening to that go back and forth, that dialogue, is it applies with our internal teams and employees and teams overall. It applies to sales. It's no different, in the individualization that you have to walk through in the sales process. You mentioned before we started that term discernment, of getting really good at understanding where you're at and where the client's at. I think it's just funny how it all works together. And one thing, maybe the last kind of topic that we'll hit on that we discussed, that I know is in the book quite a bit, referring to team members, but we have to have great relationships with our team members, right? And I think it applies to clients as well, in order to do exactly what you're talking about. If you're going to have a one-to-one that's different for each person to a degree, you've got to know what's important to that person.
Right.
So the question we asked you before we started was, everybody defines a relationship different. And so maybe just talk through your thoughts around how you define those and how should people be thinking about that?
Yeah. I mean, at the risk of being overly simplistic, your relationship has way more to do with the other person than it does with yourself. I would argue that if you want to build a relationship with anybody, however, that you do start by looking at the relationship that you have with yourself. And what am I doing on a day in, day out basis to achieve the things that I want to achieve? And how am I practicing, whether it's meditation, whether it's professional development and growth? Like, I think there needs to be an inward focus on you so that you can make the most out of all your other relationships. But then it comes down to asking questions and understanding who it is that you're working with, right? Like, ask a simple question. How do you like to be communicated with? Like, if you were a client of mine, I said, Elliot, I'm going to be reaching out to you periodically. Do you prefer phone, email? Phone? Okay, great. And that's a question. I'm gonna communicate to you with phone. Yep. Like, that's a simple step, but it's one that people aren't intentional about, right? And there's lots of things that you can do, but at the end of the day, to me, it's whether it's a team member or whether it's a potential client, it's just caring about them as a person. And then asking questions about them as a person and what they do, which constitutes, 40% of their work week. It's work. So, like, how can I ask questions that are about them and about their goals and objectives, and then tailor products or anything else over time to meet those needs? And if you can't, we can go have a beer and it'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, you said something there that I think we've asked that question to several people on the show, and nobody has given that answer, which I think is probably the most important piece of focus on the relationship with you first, which is so important when you think about being an advisor to your client. And if you do the personal development, if you do you're in the right mental state, you mentioned meditation and some of those other things, you're going to be able to take the best version of yourself to your client and make them a better business because you have more knowledge in this area. Maybe you met somebody that you can bring in to facilitate this need they have, or whatever it is. But ultimately, it starts there. If you're going to be the best version of an advisor to your client, you need to be the best version of yourself. And I don't think anybody's ever approached it that way. I think that's super.
Well, and then like starting then with the client, right? And saying, like, what are you, like, how are you helping them? It's not about you. And I think that's also a big deal is, how can you look at this person and say, like, how can I add value to you personally? How can I add value to you professionally? And then being selfless in that act and continuing to, be sincere in trying to build that relationship.
Right. Well, like, I don't know what it is about me. Maybe it's because I worked a lot of different jobs growing up, but I always am blown away by people in retail or hospitality who just are really good at what they do.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not overly hard to wait tables, but it's certainly overly hard to wait tables if you're not in a good mindset or you're not in a good attitude. Right? And so when people show up and do the job well, it's like, oh, in the first minute that waiter or waitress comes to your table, what their disposition is and how that's going to go. And most times it's just fine. It's fine. And then other times it's like, that was crap. And then the rare times on the other side, it's like, they were great. They were great. And I'm glad we came here. Right. And so I don't know that that's too different with anything in that regard. The energy that you bring and the attitude that you have is going to pay a dividend in a way that's probably unquantifiable, but we all know because it's a feeling.
This is going to be such a difficult question, but if you had to add up, you sum up your first 3 meetings, how much time do you spend on building the relationship from the perspective of like value that you can bring them professionally, and how much time do you spend on them personally, just getting to know them as people?
It is a difficult question because everything's contextual, right? Like sometimes you hop on a call and if you got an alpha CEO,
it better be
like,
business.
Yeah, just get to the point.
Yeah.
Right. And so I still like the challenge of breaking them down because at the end of the day they have kids and people. They're human beings too, even if they don't want to admit it. Like,
well, they're hard assets so that they can go home and do what they want to do.
That's right.
So what do you want to do?
They're focused. They're focused. So, but as a rule, I'd say 50-50.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, on the first conversation that I have with people, it took a long time as a young salesperson to get really comfortable with, I'm not going to tell you what we do. Really. If I do, it's going to be like 2 minutes of a conversation. I'm comfortable not saying one thing and just asking them a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
And those can be personal or those can be professional. And then what happens is that you get good at prefacing how things are going to go so that it makes that more comfortable for the client.
Exactly.
Right? It's like, hey, listen, feel free to take away from what I'm about to say, but from this first meeting's agenda, I really want it to be way more ask and learn as opposed to show and tell.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to do anything for you the way we do it for so many other great clients, we have to get to know each other. Mm-hmm. Right? And then people's guards go down. It's like, and you can appreciate that, right? Well, yeah, I can appreciate that. And I do want to talk about myself.
Yeah.
Right? And so then in the second call, it might shift a little bit to where I'm doing more showing because you have to get to a spot where you're giving them a conceptual or at least a philosophical understanding of how you might help them. Mm-hmm. But even then, it's like, depose me. Ask me questions. I'm going to pepper some back to you, but let's have this be casual. Mm-hmm. Because the relationship always, at least in my mind, is first and foremost, especially relationships that are going to be ongoing in nature.
Right.
Because I don't care how good your product is, if I don't enjoy spending time with you, or whether that's quarterly or monthly, it's tough sledding.
Right.
Totally. Well, that was awesome. I feel like we could go on for hours as we get into a lot of these, but I think we're at our Big Al's giving us the signal. So that was great. I think everybody's going to have a lot to take away from that show, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it goes quick, doesn't it? When you're doing a good one.
Well, I think the last podcast I did, we were drinking Coors Light, so it went like 2 hours and 47 minutes. So,
there you go. Yeah.
Next time.
Next time.
Yeah.
Right. Sounds good. Well, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Care.
Thank you for tuning in to Getting Past the Premium. We are excited to continue breaking down barriers and finding solutions together. If you would like to reach out regarding anything you heard in today's episode, find links and contact info in the description. Until next time, have a great day, and let's continue getting past the premium.